The Muppet Show took a scrappy little puppet crew and turned it into one of TV's funniest, weirdest, and most lovable variety shows. When it premiered in 1976, viewers were dropped into a rundown theater where Kermit, Miss Piggy, Fuzzy Animal, Gonzo, and the rest of the gang somehow had to survive musical numbers, terrible jokes, exploding props, backstage disasters, and a new human guest star every week. What could possibly go wrong? Over 5 seasons and 120 episodes, the show became a worldwide hit, airing in more than 100 countries and turning a frog, a pig, and a whatever into household names. But behind the felt and that unforgettable theme song was a wild story involving rejected pilots, clashes with Saturday Night Live, exhausted puppeteers, and a decision to end the show while it was still on top. And honestly, who does that? Except maybe Seinfeld. Here are 15 surprising facts about The Muppet Show. Stick around for number 15 to see how the show's return finally recaptured the original magic after decades of false starts. But first, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss more deep dives into classic TV that just refuses to disappear. Number 1. Kermit's long road to becoming a frog. The most famous frog in entertainment didn't even start out as a frog. For his first decade on TV, Kermit was basically a polite green question mark with no real species. Jim Henson built the original Kermit in 1955 for a local Washington, D.C. show called Sam and Friends. He had no budget and no one looking over his shoulder, so he got creative with whatever was lying around. Kermit's body came from his mother's old turquoise spring coat. The inside was made from Henson's worn-out jeans, and the eyes were 2 ping-pong balls cut in half and painted by hand. That early Kermit looked flat, collarless, and kind of lizard-like with round feet and no official identity. For more than 10 years, he was not Kermit the Frog. He was just Kermit. Strange, flexible, and still figuring himself out. Then the world started making the decision for Henson. A 1965 appearance on The Tonight Show helped people see him as Kermit the Frog. A 1966 toy catalog called him a fanciful frog. By 1968, Kermit was calling himself a frog on TV. The big change came in the 1969 special Hey Cinderella, when Henson gave Kermit web flipper feet and his now famous pointed collar. The collar covered the seam between his neck and body, but it also completed the classic frog look. By the time The Muppet Show arrived, Kermit's whole personality was locked in, calm, sincere, and constantly stressed by chaos he somehow helped create. Today, that original coat and jeans Kermit lives in the Smithsonian. A national treasure made from household scraps and 2 ping-pong balls. Not bad for something built from the family trash. Number 2. The Saturday Night Live experiment that went wrong. Before The Muppet Show, Jim Henson needed to prove his creations could play to adults, not just children watching Sesame Street. When NBC invited him to join a risky new late-night sketch series in 1975, it looked like the perfect opportunity. The result was The Land of Gorch, a recurring segment on Saturday Night Live's first season. Its stars were not Kermit or Piggy. Instead, a new cast took the stage. King Plubus, Queen Puta, Scred, Whis, and the stone idol, the mighty Favog. They lived in a bleak wasteland, traded innuendo, and behaved like Muppets who had been banished from educational programming forever. It was Henson's test drive for fully adult Muppets. There was one catch. Writers Guild rules meant only SNL staff writers could script the sketches. Henson and his team weren't allowed to write a single line. Writer Michael O'Donoghue refused outright, famously declaring he didn't write for felt. Alan Zwell recalled that writers literally drew straws each week to see who was stuck with the Muppet segment, comparing it to comedy jury duty no one could escape. John Belushi was especially vocal about sharing airtime with puppets. The sketches never settled into a groove, landing somewhere between Muppets and SNL, and audiences never connected. By the end of season 1, Gorch was gone. That failure became a turning point. Henson realized the Muppets couldn't thrive as guests in someone else's world. They needed their own stage, their own writers, and their own rhythm. Number 3, a pilot called Sex and Violence. When Henson got the chance to pitch his own variety series in 1975, he didn't play it safe. He made a pilot for ABC with a title that sounded more like a warning label than family entertainment. The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence. The title was his deliberate spoof of the era's obsession with controversial content on television, a humorous hook, as he later called it, everything people worried about seeing on TV performed by puppets. The pilot revolved around a pageant of the 7 deadly sins: envy, sloth, lust, and the rest, judged by Muppets in no position to judge anyone. It was hosted not by Kermit but by Nigel, a humanoid Muppet Henson hoped would become the new lead. Kermit appeared only briefly, and Henson would later admit that sidelining his most recognizable character was a mistake. But buried in the chaos was a future empire. The Electric Mayhem, Dr. Teeth, Floyd, Janice, Zoot, and Animal all debuted here. So did Sam the Eagle, the Swedish Chef, Statler and Waldorf, and Crazy Harry. Rough versions of Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, and Gonzo lurked at the edges, waiting for their turn. Critics responded well. American networks did not. U.S. executives passed on a full series twice, and Henson had to cross the Atlantic, partnering with British impresario Lord Lou Grade to finally bring the Muppet Show to life. The provocative pilot had done its job, refining the tone, introducing key characters, and setting the intelligence that would define the series. Number 4. Miss Piggy's journey from background pig to icon. It's hard to imagine the Muppet Show without Miss Piggy, but she began as almost an afterthought. Her earliest incarnation appeared in 1974 on The Tonight Show, performed by Frank Oz as Piggy Lee, a pig lip-syncing to a song. A few months later, Jerry Nelson tried a version of her on a Herb Alpert special. Then Fran Brill took a turn performing a sharp, glamorous blonde pig in the Sex and Violence pilot. 3 appearances, 3 performers, no clear personality. Designer Bonnie Erickson initially named the character Miss Piggy Lee, a nod to singer Peggy Lee, but the name shortened to Miss Piggy to avoid legal attention. When The Muppet Show launched, she was still just a supporting player, a running gag about a pig hopelessly in love with a frog. Frank Oz shared the role with Richard Hunt through much of the first season. Then the character clicked. Oz layered brute force under fragile glamour, a short temper in an evening gown, insecurity wrapped in total self-confidence. That contrast turned a one-note joke into one of the most complex characters in the Muppet ensemble. By season 2, she was a headliner, anchoring sketches like Pigs in Space and Veterinarian's Hospital and out-divine many of the human stars who joined her on stage. Oz later said that Fozzie Bear felt two-dimensional and Animal had no dimensions at all, but Piggy was fully three-dimensional. Henson agreed so strongly that when he developed Fraggle Rock, he wrote in his notes that no one should try to create another character with Miss Piggy's particular kind of appeal. Number 5. Mana Mana, and its very un-Muppety origins. Mana Mana sounds like a song born for children's television, nonsense syllables, a simple melody, and puppets arguing over how to sing it. Its real origin was much stranger. The tune came from a 1968 Italian Mondo documentary titled Sweden, Heaven and Hell, a film that focused on what it portrayed as Sweden's sexually liberated lifestyle, with nudity and shocking scenes designed to scandalize audiences. Composer Piero Umiliani wrote the song for the film, where it played over a scene of towel-wrapped women heading into a sauna. It was never meant for lunchboxes or children's records. Jim Henson heard it, and heard something else entirely. In November 1969, he adapted the tune for Sesame Street, and 3 days later took a refined version to The Ed Sullivan Show. That performance crystallized the bit. When The Muppet Show premiered in 1976, Henson restaged Mana Mana as the very first musical number. 3 fuzzy creatures bickering over a nonsense song became the series' instant signature. On the strength of the Muppet performances, Umiliani's original Italian recording climbed into the UK top 10 in 1977, riding entirely on Muppet Show hype. A novelty cue from an exploitation documentary became one of the purest distillations of Muppet comedy. Number 6. The laugh track Jim Henson didn't want but needed. Henson disliked canned laughter. He believed it told viewers when to react instead of trusting them to find the humor themselves. When he tested the Muppet Show pilot, he tried it both ways, with and without a laugh track. Watching both versions, He reluctantly conceded that the track helped. "It's unfortunate," he said, "but it makes the show funnier." Because the series was shot in England, far from standard American laugh libraries, Henson's team built their own, recording genuine reactions from cast and crew during playback sessions. It was convincing enough that fans wrote in asking for tickets to the tapings, assuming there was a live audience. The show immediately started playing with the device. In the premiere, Kermit tells viewers outright that whether a joke lands is up to the laugh track, breaking the illusion even as they used it. The experiment went further in a Season 2 episode with Steve Martin, where the premise was that the regular show had been canceled for one night in favor of open auditions, meaning no in-show audience and no laugh track. The only laughter heard came from Muppets watching from backstage. Richard Hunt's laugh was so loud and distinctive that the sound team had to mix in pre-recorded laughter just to balance it out. What began as a tool Henson resisted became one more piece of the show's comedy, something the Muppets could acknowledge, subvert, and play against whenever a joke needed the help. Number 7. Gonzo's Identity Crisis. Before he was the Great Gonzo, he was a nameless oddity called Snarl, the cigar box Frackle. Jim Henson built the puppet for the 1970s special The Great Santa Claus Switch, where Snarl's contribution was popping out of a cigar box to hand the villain a cigar. For the next few years, the same puppet drifted through background roles, looking like a creature waiting for instructions. When the Muppet Show began, the puppet finally gained a name, Gonzo, but in the first season he remained a droopy, sad presence whose comic potential hadn't fully surfaced. Between seasons, performer Dave Goelz modified the puppet, adding movable eyelids. That small mechanical change was transformative. Now Gonzo could shift from morose to manic, underdog to daredevil, in an instant. Writers leaned into his strangeness. Other Muppets tried to guess what he was: a turkey, a blue thing, a weirdo. Eventually, they stopped pretending there was an answer, and Gonzo officially became a whatever. Years later, the film Muppets from Space would reveal him as an alien, but even Goelz later told fans the alien origin was just for the movie. In practice, whatever remained the truest description. Number 8. The physical toll behind the felt. Watching The Muppet Show, it's easy to believe the characters move effortlessly. For the performers underneath, it was closer to an endurance sport. Standard Muppet staging placed puppeteers below the set with one arm extended straight overhead, controlling the character's head and mouth while watching a monitor on the floor. That meant twisted necks, bent backs, and shoulders locked in unnatural positions for long stretches. Some scenes forced performers to lie flat in cramped trenches, contorting to stay out of camera range. Dave Goelz, who performed Gonzo, endured multiple shoulder surgeries and a hip replacement over his career, around 9 operations in all, directly tied to years of puppeteering. Chronic shoulder, neck, and back issues were common among the core team. The monitor system demanded a constant split focus, perform upward, watch downward, and synchronize movements to what the audience would see rather than what the body felt. Every wave, every held pose meant someone's muscles were paying a price just off camera. Number 9. The balcony critics named after grand hotels. Statler and Waldorf, the two tuxedoed curmudgeons heckling from the balcony, weren't given random names. They were named after two of New York's most famous hotels, the Statler Hilton and the Waldorf Astoria, establishments built on high expectations and a clientele used to complaining when perfection slipped. The hotel names framed the pair as old money patrons who believed they had every right to judge. They were never written as prisoners of the theater. They kept returning because complaining was the entertainment. The references ran deeper. Waldorf's rarely seen wife was named Astoria, completing the set. When she finally appeared in a 1979 episode, she looked exactly like Statler in a dress, down to the face and scowl. In a final twist, no one can definitively say who performed Astoria. Multiple Muppet alumni have been asked, and none recall being the hands behind her. Decades before online comment sections, The Muppet Show had already created the archetype of sharply dressed trolls with the best seats in the house. Number 10. Why almost every Muppet is left-handed. On The Muppet Show, almost every character is left-handed. Kermit strums his banjo, left-handed. Janice and Floyd play their instruments like southpaws. The reason is purely mechanical. Most puppeteers are right-handed, and the right hand has the primary job of going inside the Muppet's head to open and close the mouth and shape expressions. That hand controls the illusion of thought. The left hand does whatever is left, either slipping into the puppet's glove or holding a thin rod attached to the puppet's wrist. When a scene requires two active hands, a second performer joins in, operating the other arm. The Muppet team called this right-handing, and it became a form of apprenticeship for new performers learning timing from inches away. There was one exception. Performer Louise Gold was left-handed, so her characters became rare right-handed Muppets. Fans who studied the show closely could sometimes identify her work just by noting which hand a background character favored. Number 11. A name that meant nothing by design. Muppet is one of television's most recognizable words, but for years its supposed meaning was a story Jim Henson told because it sounded good. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, he explained that Muppet was a blend of marionette and puppet. Journalists repeated it without question. Earlier, in the 1950s, he had offered a different explanation, saying it combined hand puppet and stick puppet. Over 2 decades, the story quietly shifted. In the early 1980s, Henson finally admitted the truth. Muppet was simply a word he made up because he liked the way it sounded. The marionette explanation was a retrofitted story, not an origin. The irony is that Henson rarely used marionettes. His work relied on hand puppets and rods, not strings. In the end, the invented etymology fit the Muppet ethos perfectly, a charming story told with a straight face, hiding the simpler truth that sometimes a word is just a word that feels right. Number 12. Ending at the top on purpose. At its peak in 1978, The Muppet Show reached roughly 235 million viewers in over 100 countries. Conventional wisdom said, keep going until the numbers drop. Henson went the other way and ended it in 1981. The show wasn't failing, but the variety format had settled into a comfortable pattern, and for a creative team built on experimentation, that felt like a warning. Head writer Jerry Jewell said the staff feared watching the show slowly decay. Meanwhile, the characters were thriving on the big screen. With 120 episodes completed and the magic syndication number reached, Henson chose to treat 5 seasons as a complete work. The final episode was the Gene Kelly installment, and the writing team threaded it with quiet farewells. Kelly had resisted doing Singing in the Rain, not wanting to revisit his most famous number, and the writers made that reluctance a running gag throughout the episode. In the final moments, he relented, picked up his umbrella, and on a lovingly rebuilt set performed Singing in the Rain one last time, closing not just the episode but the entire series. Few hit shows get to choose their own ending. Henson did, and he left before the magic could thin. Number 13. The Swedish chef's hands had minds of their own. Most Muppets had fabric hands controlled by rods. The Swedish chef had something more unsettling: actual human hands. The character was a 2-person operation. Jim Henson controlled the head and performed the mock Swedish gibberish, a voice he reportedly developed by listening to language tapes in his car and improvising fake recipes at traffic lights. Frank Oz stood directly behind Henson with his arms pushed through the chef's sleeves, so his bare hands appeared as the puppets. Every chop, stir, and wild utensil swing was Oz in real time. To keep things unpredictable, Oz would frequently grab the wrong prop, drop an object, or take a gag in an unplanned direction without warning. Henson had to react on the fly every time. According to Oz, the best chef sketches were the ones with the least rehearsal. Underneath the nonsense syllables and flying food was a carefully orchestrated trust exercise between 2 performers played out in front of cameras and real kitchen knives. Number 14. The co-star celebrities fought over. On a show packed with beloved characters, one Muppet drew a disproportionate amount of star power: Miss Piggy. Guest performers could request scenes with almost anyone, but again and again visiting celebrities asked to share the stage with the temperamental pig most likely to karate chop them mid-number. Her demands, tantrums, and self-assured glamour let guests lean into exaggerated versions of themselves, knowing Piggy would always go bigger. Rudolf Nureyev, one of the greatest ballet dancers of the 20th century, spent his 1978 episode dancing opposite an enormous ballerina pig in Swine Lake. Elton John leaned straight into the theatrical chaos, turning their duet into a full-blown spectacle. In a cast built from foam and felt, the diva pig became the co-star human celebrities courted most eagerly and the one partner almost guaranteed to steal the scene. Number 15. The 50th Anniversary Comeback. Over the years, there were multiple attempts to recapture the Muppet Show's magic. Muppets Tonight in the 1990s, an office-style mockumentary in the 2010s, and a short-lived streaming series all tried to reposition the Muppets for new eras. None fully worked, largely because they abandoned the original theater variety format that had defined the brand. In February 2026, on the 50th anniversary of the original series, the strategy finally changed. Rather than reinvent, Disney restored. They brought back the Muppet Theater, the backstage corridors, the opening theme, and the premise of Kermit frantically trying to hold a show together while everything falls apart around him. The guest list was contemporary, with Sabrina Carpenter as the main guest and Maya Rudolph and Seth Rogen woven into the chaos, but the structure was unmistakably classic. The special drew 7.58 million viewers across Disney Plus and ABC and earned overwhelmingly positive reviews. Critics agreed that the Muppets didn't need updating so much as context. Given back their theater, they felt timeless. At the heart of that success was Dave Goelz, the performer who once walked into Henson's world with homemade puppets and left with Gonzo. At 79, he was back in the pit performing Gonzo, Waldorf, Zoot, and Bunsen Honeydew, the last original 1976 cast member still actively performing with the Muppets, bridging half a century of felt and ingenuity. The special hinted that more might follow. For a show that once chose to bow out on top, a full return began to feel like destiny, unfinished business for a frog, a pig, whatever, and the people who never stopped bringing them to life. Thanks for watching these 15 strange and surprisingly heartfelt truths behind the Muppet Show. Which fact surprised you the most? The coat and jeans frog, the SNL experiment that backfired, or the 79-year-old puppeteer still lifting Gonzo overhead in 2026? If this trip back to the Muppet Theater brought back memories of theme songs, balcony heckling, and late-night reruns, hit like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who still hums Mana Mana without warning. And until next time, keep watching.